Hello, everyone who's joining us. We will get started right on the top of the hour with our webinar. But while we're waiting for others to join us, if you can, we'd love to know where you're calling in from. So please drop it in the chat. You'll get a little call out.
Well, I'll get the ball rolling, Angie. So I'm here in Zurich today, based in the UK, but happily to be visiting the Beekeeper head office here in Zurich in our wonderful Hive office in the library room, hence all of the books behind us.
Yeah, and I'm originally from Texas, Austin, Texas to be exact, and I'm here in the Zurich office as well. So it's really great to be here doing this webinar together.
So we've got someone called Logan calling in from Sacramento, California. Hey, Logan, hope it's not too wet where you are. I hear there's a Pineapple Express hitting California these days.
And we've got Jessica calling in from Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania. Quite the opposite end of the country from Sacramento. All right, it is top of the hour, so maybe we should go ahead and get started.
I think let's do that, Angie.
All right. So welcome everyone to the 2024 Frontline Workforce Pulse Report Insights webinar, where we're going to be taking a look at navigating the future for deskless workers and managers. Before we get started, I wanted to give everyone a thank you for joining us, for tuning in. And while everyone's getting settled, also address a few housekeeping items so that everyone knows what to expect from the webinar today. So first question, I think the most important question is, will we get a recording of the webinar? Yes. So if you registered and attended, we will make sure to have a recap of today's webinar, the recording, as well as share with you again the copy of the Frontline Workforce Pulse Report that we will be talking about today. There's a couple of ways also for you to get any Q&A in if you have any questions throughout the webinar. You can either add that to the Q&A module that's at the bottom of the Zoom, or you can drop the question in the chat box, and we'll make sure to try to address as many of those as we can before the end of the session. For anything that we're not able to get to, we'll be sure to follow up with you as well, along with the recording of the webinar recap as well. So last thing I will say is please interact with us. We'd love to get your feedback, whether that's in the chat or in the post-webinar poll. Please feel free to give us also a thumbs up emoji if any of these topics resonate with you today. All right. Today's presenters, my name is Angie Parsons. I'm the Director of Product Marketing, and I'm joined today with one of my fantastic colleagues, Joe Ballard, Chief of Staff and VP of Business Operations. He is the Grand Master of all the data analysis and insights extraction from the Frontline survey that we'll be talking about. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Angie. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Before we get started, I always like to start these webinars with a little bit of a conversation starter. And a little bit of a get to know you. So as an icebreaker, I would love for you to share with us one of your frontline memories or experiences that you've had.
So Angie, the UK, if you've ever visited, you'll know we're famous for our pubs, which can get pretty busy and chaotic, but full of character. When I was a student many years ago, I used to support myself by working in pubs. I loved that work. The pay wasn't great, but the satisfaction was high. What I really loved was making sure that customers got served in the right order. The bar could get chaotic, people would turn up, but I always kept an eye on who was coming and when, and made sure that the next person in line got served their drink in the right order. And I love that work. And though I'm VP of Business Operations these days, I sometimes wish I could work in a pub once again.
Well, we can make that happen. I'm sure we've got some customers. Love to get you behind the bar.
I'm all in.
All right.
Angie, you're a fantastic director of product marketing. Tell us about you. Have you got some frontline experiences as an icebreaker?
I do. In fact, in many industries, but most recently, I'm actually also a group fitness instructor besides my day job here at Beekeeper. And one of the things that really drives my motivation and satisfaction is also ensuring that my customers, the members that attend my classes, get a great experience when they come to the gym. One of the things that on the flip side makes me a little bit wishful for better processes and solutions is that sometimes if I have to get shift coverage or for whatever reason I have to cancel a class, it can be tough to get my class covered. And I think that impacts the customer experience. So I always want to make sure that I'm committed to my members, and not only for me not to get any FOMO, but imagine the stress of being able to find an instructor to cover for you, or short-sighting that member of a great customer experience at the location. So that is something that is always top of mind for me as I work here at Beekeeper to help organizations with their frontline success.
Well, I tell you what, Angie, maybe as some bonus content at the end of this webinar, you could instruct me on some fitness for the dial-in viewers.
Sure.
Maybe not. Okay. Let's go.
All right. So really quickly, we're going to go through a couple key areas. We're going to talk about the methodology first of the Frontline Pulse Report and where the results came from. We're going to talk about some insights and then share some recommendations as well. So about the 2024 Frontline Workforce Pulse Report, the survey methodology, where did we get the responses that ultimately led to our report that we, again, pulled together these insights for? We conducted a survey in September of 2023, so a few months ago. And in the survey, we received about 8,000 beekeeper user responses across a multitude of industries. Most notably, hospitality, construction, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, and logistics. And we conducted this survey in 3 different languages, so English, German, and French. The 50-50 split was between North America and EMEA responses, or European responses, and about 45 of those European responses were German. We asked 3 different audiences: our frontline workers, which made up about 69% of the responses, our frontline managers made up about 28% of the responses, and then our global administrators. Think about these people as headquarters or front office, which made up about 3% of the responses. And that was a new area for us this year because we wanted to capture that voice as well in the results.
So when I'm not working in a pub, Angie, or doing SaaS operations, I'm a real statistics geek. So I was so delighted when I saw that we have 8,000 responses from so many industries, so many geographies, and across so many roles. That has lent us the ability to get some really rich insights. In terms of how we structured the survey, we asked 4 things. We asked about job hopping, so who'd left their job and changed jobs in the past year and the reasons why. We asked about motivation. What were the things that really stimulate workers and managers in their frontline roles? We asked about stress, what gets them down and worried at work. And then crucially and importantly, we asked about productivity. What is it that really makes them more or less productive, and what can we learn from that? In addition, to throw some really interesting angles on this, we asked managers and headquarters what they thought, but also what they thought their workers were thinking. And this was really important and fascinating to help us understand what we call the frontline disconnect. And this is where employers really fail to grasp the stressors, motivators, productivity drivers for what's happening on the front line. And this served us some really rich insights. So Ange, let's dive in.
Yep. First, we're going to talk about some of the insights. Again, we'll walk through each of these as we discovered them and put them into the report. The first being that disengaged frontliners are actually leaving in droves. And there's job hopping that's happening in mass. And it's now really kind of at an epidemic level that's driven beyond COVID and that timeline that happened a few years back. These are now lifestyle choices that are coupled with a harsh reality of double-digit inflation, as we all know and hear about in the news. And this is also escalating from toxic work environments and just, again, the perpetuation of everything that's happened over the course of the last few years. Globally, we are seeing around 40% of this being turnover, and in certain industries, it could be even as high as 60%. And the frontline world has really moved on beyond that kind of post-pandemic timeframe. But again, this is now a time of great resignation. It's kind of here to stay. So a little bit of insight into our next insight, but again, high churn really remains real and damaging.
And before we move on, folks who dialed in, just take a look at those numbers. This was from a really major sample, 8,000 responses, and those are huge turnover rates. Now, we know in frontline industries, people can move on quite frequently, but if you're an industry, if you're an employer suffering from more than 50% turnover each year, the costs are huge in terms of retraining, rehiring, etc. Now, this wasn't the case for every company who was surveyed. The companies who do well, who have the lower churn and attrition rates, are those who are really listening to, engaging and understanding what motivates, stresses and drives productivity in their employees. So the seeds of success are out there, but you do need to listen carefully to what your workers are saying.
And I think something also to note is that there's definitely an appetite and a want from frontline workers, frontline managers for some change. Before we go on to the next insight, we just wanted to again kind of share with you what the results from one of the questions that led us to this insight, this first insight, which was, why did you quit your last job? And when we take a look at these results, we see that in the top three, number one, wages and pay for the workers came in at 38%. In the second place, work-life balance came in at 34%. And in third, for the worker, better prospects. So new opportunities that arose that just made it a pretty clear call for them to quit their jobs.
The biggest concern from this list, Angie, was how we saw toxic management and just toxic workplace in general rising up. That's something that's much higher than the previous year, and it's a concerning trend, one that we were surprised at. And as we do future surveys, we'll dig in more to that situation.
All right, insight number two. I spoke about this just briefly, but the great resignation is here to stay, and it's not just about the money. So this is really, really fascinating for us, as we just discovered in that last survey results of that question. We saw that key points from external factors really are also impacting this. But again, it's not just about the money, even though that is the highest wage and pay result. So what we saw is that, really we're living right now in a time that people are more about working to live rather than living to work. And if it's not meeting their needs or their expectations of what they want in a career or in their professional lives, they're going to easily leave. So especially in frontline work, we see this kind of being just a lower risk. They're going to go ahead and make those changes so it suits them better. We see that the stress of low pay increases, and again, that high inflation has really skyrocketed. And then there's the year-to-year results that we saw. In our 2022 survey, it was just a worker aspect that was being impacted. And now we're seeing that managers are also citing those similar stressors from the 23 results. And a couple of interesting variances coming up in these turnover results was really around certain industries. We saw that the highest churn group was the frontline managers in hospitalities for bars and restaurants. Those managers at those pubs are feeling like they have more compelling reasons to leave their jobs. And that came in at 61% in the US. We also saw that some of the most stable industries were actually retail and manufacturing in our German regions, coming in at 25%. And then really around that toxic workplace, toxic management culture factor, this really stood out in our German region for managers in healthcare and construction as their number one reason to quit. All right, insight number three. Frontline stresses are growing with no end in sight. And what do we mean by that? It's really, again, this surging inflation has caused a deluge in workplace stress. So wages, more exactly, things like cost of living and inflation is outstripping pay increases almost as universally as the leading factor of stressors for the frontliners. So compared to last year, managers are now also feeling this stress more intensely. And across industries, we see that the cost of living pain and stresses is most keenly felt in that construction industry, with 33% citing it as a top stressor, retailers coming in at 31%, logistics at 33%, and then healthcare at 18%. Though it's a top stressor, it may actually not be a leading driver for people to make some drastic changes. And I don't know, Joe, do you have some thoughts on that?
For sure. From a frontline worker's perspective, so after wages, leading to stressors, as you can see here, were understaffing at the workplace and feeling safe. And that was pretty consistent across all industries. And that safety topic, that's something you'll pick up in a minute, Angie, but we think that's a really important signal. In terms of feedback, negative feedback was mentioned very minimally as a stressor, but at the reverse, so receiving positive feedback is highly rated as a motivator. So it seems to tell us that our frontline workers, they're resilient. They can put up with negative feedback. They've got thick skin, but they're humans after all. Words matter. And when you give them strong encouragement, that really can be a big positive motivator.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and zoom in on that third, the stressor that came in on at number 3, which was around safety. So the frontliners have a message to send to their managers and head of office staff. It is really that they need to understand their need for safety and security. And this is, again, a major concern for our frontline workers. This insight is where we start to see that disconnect, again, between the workers and management more intensely in the results that we got from the survey. The expectations that and assumptions of their employees is really, that stressor of safety and security, because it is poorly misunderstood and realized by managers and headquarters who actually perceived it much lower in priority. We gave the respondents 8 choices, and it came in at number 7 for their frontline workers. What we see is that disconnect is also correlated to a common misunderstanding, of what exactly safety and security means to each individual, and then how the employees are actually actioning upon that. So while corporate managers and headquarters might believe that workplace safety means 0 physical incidents or having a poster on a wall that states safety protocol for compliance reasons, for the frontline worker, that is a much broader topic. It could be anything from ensuring that the workplace is safe from aggression and threats, outside external threats are minimized, where mental and emotional safety is also accounted for beyond just the physical, and security of workplace stability. So their own jobs, making sure that those are stable. Protection brings them peace of mind. And in fact, in the US, even health insurance and benefits were cited in the free text responses.
Yeah. Angie, we can't stress this enough. So frontline can be tough, can sometimes be dangerous. And while employers do think about safety, it seems too often workers perceive the employers are just covering their own backs. They've really got to show to workers that they care about their safety, their security, and nurturing them in a good environment.
Totally. All right. Let's talk about insight number 5. And actually, I'm going to turn this to Joe to share this with you all.
Well, this was a nice question to ask. We asked what motivates you at work, and we looked at what workers said and what the managers expected. Good news is there's a pretty close correlation. Everyone seems to agree that a friendly and a fun and nurturing environment is the #1 motivator at work. Likewise, getting the job done, that simple but important core satisfaction, whether you're working in a pub, a building site, hospital, getting that job done well, safely, on time, to the customer's satisfaction is a huge motivator. Surprisingly, when it came to motivation, you can see that wages, it features at number 4, but it's not top of the pile. So people get stressed by the cost of living. It can be a problem and it can concern them. When it comes to the positive side, the upside of what really drives and makes them happy and productive at work, it's the environment, it's getting the job done, it's getting acknowledgement that really seems to matter the most. In the US, when we look down at the regions, opportunities for personal development also made it into the top 3. We saw that managers are highly motivated by passing on their skills and their knowledge. And in industries, we saw in retail in particular, customer feedback was a strong motivator, probably not surprising. Whereas in construction, feedback from teammates was the really strong motivator. So what we learned from this is that keeping it simple, getting it back to basics is the key thing to motivating frontline workers. Acknowledging getting the job done, creating a safe, friendly, fun environment go a long, long way to driving productivity and retention in your workforce.
That's really great news. I'm going to round us out with our sixth insight, and that really is around productivity. And what we found was that productivity dips when motivators are ignored and operational issues aren't addressed. And this might feel like it's like a, well, of course. But, again, the data shows this as being a major point for productivity for workers. We saw that workers listed coming in at number one, understaffed shifts being a top productivity limiter. Number two, the lack of recognition, a powerful demotivator. And number three, poor communications coming in. And again, this is probably where we saw the largest disconnect between the frontline teams, both workers and managers, and then headquarters and front office, perceiving it as, again, one of those biggest barriers for productivity. How do they prioritize that? Universally insufficient staffing is seen by workers and managers alike as actually a leading cause for underproductivity, suggesting that, if you're cutting corners on staffing, it's really kind of a false economy. Messy shift staffing and shift management is actually a very costly flub for the business. And on the point of shift management, this goes back to some of the previous insights that we talked about, correlating to the responses earlier where we said, staffing was a top stressor for workers who are then left feeling that pinch when their shifts are then understaffed. And this creates a revolving door of new employees, causing challenges in inefficiencies and optimization. So it's kind of a cyclical thing that creates a lot of challenge for the business. And then it's not easy on the managers either. So their productivity is also impacted when they have to do more administrative work or start at square one if they have to, let's say, retrain someone or train a new hire or rehiring. Again, that turnover and churn is a really big impacted area for productivity.
Angie, before we move on to the wrap up, I just want to dwell for another moment on this chart. As a stats geek, it really fascinates me, but this lays bare what we call the frontline disconnect. When it comes to productivity, and let's not forget, this is where the money is made. This is where the profit is made in these companies. The workers have a very different perception to head office. So we can all learn from this. And Angie, you've given the explanations line by line, but the key takeaway here is, employers, are you listening to your frontline workers? Do you really understand the productivity on the front line? Our research would suggest you're not. And that's something to be addressed.
All right. So those are our 6 insights. Joe, let's talk about, some recommendations for the audience.
So we've shared a lot, but we've boiled this down into 2 key takeouts and some actions that we think that you can make in your business. So takeout number 1, the cost of living crisis added to what we call the great rethink. So people thinking about work-life balance and prospects. You put those 2 things together, and mass job hopping is still rife. It's still a major, major issue in the front line. Takeout number 2, the needs, the motivations, the desires, the concerns and stresses of the front line are criminally misunderstood by managers. While that's sad, it's also unprofitable. It leads to suboptimal productivity. It's something you've really got to address in your businesses if you see this issue. There are actions that you can take. Firstly, concretely, you think about pay, benefits, but fair compensation. This came through in our text analysis, really being fairly rewarded and recompensed for your work. And for benefits, making sure that health insurance, travel, all of those added extras that can make an employee feel nurtured and cared for is very important motivator. Some of the basics, competent shift and staffing management, as you saw from the productivity chart, this is really painful. You're not staffing enough. You may be cutting a corner on costs, but you're really damaging your productivity. And thirdly, giving workers a diversity of tasks. Frontline can be repetitive, it can be quite menial. That comes with the territory. But if you're smart and you give your workers a variety of tasks and a changing rota that changes from day to day or shift to shift, you'll find a really strong resonance with productivity and motivation. There are some softer actions that you can take as well. So first of all, just simply recognizing or allowing employees and teams to talk about and feel good and satisfied about the jobs that they've done. This isn't like an annual awards, it's a weekly or even a daily recognition. You've done the job, you've done it well, good stuff. A culture of safety is important, as we spoke about. It goes two ways. This isn't just about the employer covering their back, it's making sure that their workers really feel protected and secure and safe at work. And thirdly, what we call the 3 C's, communication, community, and collegiality. These are the things that drive the spirit of satisfaction, productivity, happiness on the front line. So where you can use tools, processes, or programs to make sure that your team can talk to each other, that there's a sense of community and a sense of collegiality in all that they do. This is a great motivator and productivity driver.
Great. All right, so we're going to wrap it up here fairly shortly, but again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat module. Really quickly, why is Beekeeper doing this analysis? Not only because, again, the reasons around just having the frontline workers leveraging our software and solutions, but really our focus is on the frontline worker. And we are currently continuously expanding our platform even further to support use cases that are going to help enrich the lives of our frontline workers, our frontline managers, and their staff, and ultimately bring productivity for the company. Employees are at the heart of our philosophy. So whether that means supporting their employees' ability to have visibility in shifts, maybe seeing their pay slips, better onboarding and training experiences, and just in general, easier ways of working, Beekeeper can support the way they work by bringing everything together in a single, intuitive, easy to access app. And then for our managers and business leaders, Beekeeper can help you with digitizing and simplifying your administrative processes so that you can also think about, again, that employee experience and really be there for the employees. So employee engagement first, and then bringing that employee experience to life.
Now, once we had 8,000 people answering our survey, we were happy to ask them one final question. Simply put, would you recommend the Beekeeper app? We were delighted at the positive results. Across those 3 groups we spoke to, workers 78, frontline managers 81, and headquarters 83%, all gave us a solid yes. Made us very happy, gives us a very strong net promoter score in the 60s and 70s. So that made us pleased. But the key thing is we're listening, and the question to you is, are you listening to your frontline?
Yes, that's a great way to end our session. And before we wrap up one final time, if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A. I see a few that have already come in, so we're going to switch to that and address some of those. So
there's a question here. Did we see a difference between Europe and USA responses? We did when it came to job hopping. So it was significantly higher in the US. You know, in some industries, it was 60, close to 70%. Whereas in EMEA, Europe region, tended to be in the 30 to 35%. And that's still about 1/3 of your workforce changing year on year. It's concerning. But between US and Europe, yeah, we saw higher attrition rates in US. For the other sentiment, it tended to be just about the same for those 2 regions when we looked at the industry level.
Yes. Question number 2, did you see differences in stress and motivation between the different industries? I'd say yes, and they were pretty extensive. While we didn't cover everything here today, because, again, we were taking a look at the global responses, we did have some good news to share with you, and I'll go ahead and also share with you right now, is that we are working on issuing a series of industry reports that take a look at the analysis. Again, going even deeper, starting with construction and manufacturing. We hope to have those complete later this month. And then healthcare, retail, and hospitality reports to follow. So more deep dive analysis into those results. And everyone who has registered for today's session, we will make sure that you also are invited to download those reports once they are available.
In the private question, someone's picked up on Frontline disconnect. So do you think Beekeeper helps to bridge the Frontline disconnect? Our answer is yes, we believe it can, and we believe that it does when it's used right. The clear message is bridging that disconnect is not just about one-way, top-down communications. You've got to bridge it through two-way communications, genuinely listening and allowing workers to have a voice to management, a voice to each other. That's the key to bridging the Frontline disconnect.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that that's also a multitude of things. It's not just tools and technology like Beekeeper, but also, again, management, taking care and interest in their frontline workers, livelihoods, and there's that human element that you also have to bring in, and kind of that investment that as businesses need to make, not just an investment in technologies, but of course the technology is going to go a long way in helping support that. All right. How are other companies addressing challenges with reaching employees that don't have a computer or mobile at home and prefer face-to-face communications for everything? That's a good question. We've seen, again, different channels for communication, and particularly with Beekeeper, we have several ways that we can support and foster that cross collaborative, cross communications way to get information across to the frontline workers. So if you're curious, we'd love to schedule some time to share some of that feedback with you.
And one more question on the private channel. What was the biggest change year on year? Yeah, as we mentioned at the top of the call, inflation and cost of living. That was certainly an issue with the frontline staff last year, but now it's hitting the manager class as well. Everyone, it seems, is affected by this. And even though the pressures are easing on price increases, it still is now top of mind for managers and for workers. And we also saw that toxicity, management toxicity in particular, was rising. We saw that in DAC. And as mentioned, that's something we will drill into in future surveys, as that's a concerning trend.
Yeah. All right. This is a good one. I constantly see increasing use of technology to enable frontline work and measure what's been accomplished, resulting in an increase of corner office frontline gap. Even the best systems quickly get out of whack as life happens. How do you advise Beekeeper clients to keep technology from acting as a barrier to the two-way flow of information between corner office and frontline?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think keep it human. When we looked at the tone of voice, so quite often corner office thinks that what the workers need to know is the corporate vision statement for the next 3 years, or what a fabulous employer it is in such and such a poll. It's interesting, but it's not really resonating. Keep it human, be personal, be open, visit the front line, talk about your experiences, and don't be afraid to let that feedback rise up from the workers. It really humanizes and bridges that disconnect between head office and the shop floor.
Yeah. And I'd also say that if you're a Beekeeper customer, leverage some of the tools and solutions, the features that we have in Beekeeper to also get that sentiment and that feeling from what is resonating with your employees. So things like surveys, forms, polls, mechanisms to help capture, what kind of messages they like to receive, what's helpful for them in their day-to-day jobs. Again, just find ways to use kind of those communications channels to understand what their needs are in terms of communication for information, and what can you bring into the system and simplify, again, because sometimes that corporate vision might not resonate, but maybe we can position it in a different way or in a different channel, and again help them see the vision and connect to their ultimate responsibilities. Any other questions?
Ange, that looks like all for questions, but we've got a final message for the audience.
Yes. And that is, if you've attended today's webinar, hopefully you've already downloaded the report, but if you haven't, we'd love to send that to you. And so here's a QR code that you can scan and get that report right away sent to your inbox directly. And again, if we have any questions or want to deep dive a little bit more into the analysis, we are here also to have those conversations with you. So we'd love to follow up with you on those. And
that's not all,
Mhm.
right?
That's
We'll
not
leave you
all.
wanting more. So coming soon, watch this space. We got so much information from the industries. We decided to do an industry level deep dive on construction, manufacturing, healthcare, hospitality, and retail. We've got those in the pipeline. They go even more scientific, and we've been very pleased to work with the Lucerne University to do some AI, of course, NLP analysis, looking into the 17,000 text responses that came from our respondents. Really fascinating surveys. If you've been on the call today, you'll be sent the links to them, but watch out. If you work in one of these 5 industries, you'll find some really great granular insights for you to learn from.
Yeah. I have one quick question. What is NLP?
Natural language processing.
Oh,
You
fancy
nearly
stuff.
had me there, Angie. NLP. This is really saying when you've got 17,000 word responses, instead of creating a word cloud, which doesn't really tell you much, we've used AI, ChatGPT, to go in and tell us what were the clusters of sentiment. And actually, it was quite different to some of the survey questions that we put out. So there's some fascinating results to come in those surveys.
Yeah. And the report itself, actually, we extracted a few of those quotes, again, straight from the responses that we received from frontline workers, managers, and head office. So you can take a look at some of those and maybe, again, see if any of those resonate with you or your frontline teams. All right. Well, I think that comes to our close. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you found today's webinar, the content that we discussed, these topics and our conversation enlightening, and again, taking some of those actions, those concrete actions and those soft actions back to your own workforce. We'd love to see if those make an impact for you and your frontline teams. Once again, thank you, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.